if everybody will take a second, if you got a cell phone, please turn it to off or the volume down or to vibrate. Okay, good evening. I'm John Butler, the president for the Brunswick Civil War Roundtable. So I'd like to welcome everybody here to tonight's meeting. If at the end of the meeting, if you're interested in buying a print or buying a book, please stay, go there. We got a fire sale going on those items. Okay, if everybody would please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we got a good crowd tonight. Any new members or guests? If you would, please stand. How's the volume? Everybody can hear fine? All right, good. Jack?
Good evening. I'm Jack Carpenter, the chairman of the nomination committee. And for about the fourth year in a row, I've failed again. We have no new nominees for these jobs. And I think it's because they're so hard, the jobs are. They're really difficult. And in order to show appreciation for the people who've been doing the job, I'd like to introduce a few of them. We can't have all of them here because our treasurer is out in the lobby counting money. And one of the other gals is gone.
Cindy, she's medical.
Pardon?
Medical.
Medical. Cindy's on a medical leave, okay. So the other two vice presidents we have are Gar Dowell and Jim Kane. And Jim is our secretary. And Gar heads up getting our programs done. Cindy Brochure is on medical, and Gary Krupp is our treasurer. And like I say, he's tied up out there. I'm going to maybe break a rule or something if you look at how you're supposed to do this, but I'm going to ask that all of these, and by the way, I forget our most important, and that's our president, John Butler, who is running again. I'd like to, rather than going through them individually and taking more time with it, I'd like to say that's our slate of people, and I'd like to have a vote of aye in affirmation. Anybody aye? Aye. Anybody dare to say nay? Okay. By acclamation, the ayes pass, and these officers will go through into the new year. And I think we'll keep things rolling the way they are. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everybody for your confidence in the board of directors and for what we're trying to do with the organization. Thank you very much. Okay, next slide. We've told you about this. We've been publicizing some changes to the bylaws. So we got to vote on that as a membership. So do I have somebody to make a motion that we vote on the bylaws? Do I have a second? Okay, all in favor of the changes to the bylaws, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, the bylaws pass. Thank you very much. All right, next slide. 50-50. We have $91. Okay, for the $91, the number is 190950. All right, there you go. Raise your hand so we can see where you're at. Oh, up there in the balcony. Okay. And for a free book out of the Sutler's table, 191-249. 191-249. Anybody got that one? Somebody's got it. They couldn't have left yet. 191-249. You got it, okay. Okay, 190537. 190537. Okay, now, I do not get in trouble if you take the print home and the wife starts yelling at you for you bringing a painting home. That's not my problem. Okay, see Jim Kane after the program for that, okay? All right, Gar? Gar will introduce our speaker for tonight.
Good evening. And what a great crowd we've got here tonight. Happy to see everybody. We have a wonderful speaker tonight, Jim McKee. I'm not going to, as I haven't done before, you can read what's back up here. The point I have is, for those of you that were here last month, and for those of you that were on Zoom and may have come in this time, you may remember that we had an excellent athlete here last time, Judge Joe Jorgensen, who had been a basketball player and had a little run-in with Bobby Knight, the famous Indiana coach. Well, tonight we have another athlete for us. Jim McKee, rugby player, 10 years of rugby, playing for any team that would allow him to suit up for them. With one exception, if that team was going to play Guilford College, where he went to school, he wouldn't play for them. But he respected his alma mater. But like Joe Jorgensen, we have an excellent historian. You can see what he's done, and we are lucky that we have him not only here tonight, but have him up at the fort and at Brunswick Town. If you haven't been there, go up and see it. It's well worth the trip. So to speak with us tonight on his second favorite fort, Fort Caswell, we have Jim McKee.
Oh. Scratch this. Okay, how about now? Thank you very much. Good night. Are y'all ready to have some fun? Okay, I try to make these fun. But before I start, I'm going to plug my book that's right up front here. I finally, after all these years, have written a book about my love, which is Brunswick Town, Fort Anderson State Historic Site, where I happen to work. If somebody put a gun to my head and said, what is your favorite fort? And yes, I'm a fort geek. I would actually hesitate, but I would say Fort Anderson. But on the tip of my tongue would be Fort Caswell, where we're at right now. So the fact that I get to talk about something that's close to my heart and where we're actually sitting is pretty special. Now, I promise I won't go like I did the first time I spoke to a round table. I think I probably still hold the record for the longest talk. I talked for 2 hours on the 1862 New Mexico campaign. Yes, it is possible. So, Next slide. So this is where we're at right now. The white structure, white roof structure on the left is where you're sitting. That's Hatch. And what you see is what's left of the original Fort Caswell. Now, Fort Caswell is going to be started in 1826, and it's a third system fortification. Now, when I say third system fortification, that's any fort that was planned and or construction started between 1816 and 1860. There was a lot of those forts. Some of them you're familiar with. Fort Sumter, Fort Macon, Fort Pulaski. Those are all third system forts, and they all have very similar characteristics. Next slide. So you can see Fort Caswell. This is Fort Caswell as of 1830. A pentagon-shaped fort. And like most of your, well, all your third system forts, it's masonry stone. Now, there's no stone in Fort Caswell, but there is masonry. After that, everything goes to pieces. Next slide. So to give you an idea of the ground, so again, I'm just doing an overlay. So this is the 1830 drawing of the fort, overlaid of what we're looking at and what you would see today. And there's parts of this that are just gone. If you look at the corners and the gorge down to the left, I wish I had my laser pointer, I'd point these out to you. You'll see a lot of the structure is gone. Fort Caswell was altered greatly during the Civil War, but specifically after the war. And what we're going to talk about tonight is the fort from the beginning to 1865. Next. Now, what makes Fort Caswell unique, and it is an engineering marvel, is it's different from all other third system fortifications in the sense that if you think of Fort Caswell and a lot of these, Fort Sumter, Fort Pulaski, a lot of these other forts, their cannons are mounted in casemates inside the walls, as well as on the barbette tier on the top. Fort Caswell had no casemates, not for guns. So all the guns, and it would have been armed with roughly, it was pierced for like 64 guns. They would have all been mounted in barbette on top of the wall. The other thing that distinguishes Fort Caswell is the fact that it's the only fort that has concentric wet and dry ditches. So the blue is the wet ditch that went around it, also known as a moat, and the green is the dry ditch that was inside it. You had about 20 to 25 feet of moat and ditch. So any force attacking had to cross that moat and then come up onto the ditch. That ditch the moat was about 10 feet deep and would have had roughly 5 to 6 feet of water in it. Also, that's the only fort that had 3 sally ports, and a sally port is the entrances into the fort. And you can see them at the top of the picture, which is the main sally port, and then on the 2 corners. And you would have had drawbridges. So you literally, and you can, when you go out to the fort, if you explore it, then actually I'll be giving tours of the fort in April and May. I think you'll be able to find that out through the roundtable. But you'll still see some of the evidence of the drawbridges. Basically what you'll see are some of the pulleys. Really only one of the main entrances, sally ports, is still in existence that you can go in and out of. The other thing that distinguished Fort Caswell was the caponniers. Now the caponniers there was 3 sets of them, and the caponniers guard and flank, or actually they flank the drawbridges. So you have a drawbridge, and then you have these caponniers on either side of them. And caponniers are basically extensions of the wall. They're brick chambers, they have rifle galleries, and they're pierced for 2 cannons. And these cannons, each one of them would have had 1 to 2 cannons. and they would have been 32-pounder carronades. So you're talking about short, squat, 6.4-inch diameter guns. So firing canister, basically giant shotguns. So what these Caponiers' purpose was, instead of having bastions to guard the weak points, they put these Caponiers that went out into the moats, went across the moats. So to get into the drawbridge, if you wanted to attack, the only way to enter the fort was through those sally ports. You go in, and each one of those are pierced for 40 muskets. So at any given time, you're going to have an attacking force will have 21 to 42 muskets aimed in enfilade fire and crossfire. Plus, you've got these cannons. So Fort Caswell was a very tough nut to crack. Okay? Now, looking at Fort Caswell, the top image will give you an idea. The only thing that would have been seen above the glacis, and the glacis is that slope that was built up in front of the fort. The only thing that really would have been seen was the top of the barbette tier and the roof of the citadel, and maybe the chimneys. That's why Fort Caswell did not need casemated cannons, because those cannons weren't going to fire at anything. So from left to right on the top image, you got your citadel, then you got the parade ground. Then C is going to be your Sallyport Gallery. Now, what we're looking at here is, if you looked right out when you go outside tonight, that was the main Sallyport, right outside these walls. So the rifle gallery, the Sallyport Gallery, C, D would be the Sallyport, which is the actual entrance, and then F is going to be the Caponier that goes out into the moat. H, J, K, H is going to be the barbette tier. That's where the cannons are going to sit, right on top of the fort. Then you got a terraplane, which is J, and then you got the parapet, which is K. So those are the main features that you'll see on the top one in the middle. The bottom one is basically what it would look like from the inside. Now, the bottom left, when you go into the fort, you can actually see that. You can see that main entrance to the main Sallyport, the entrance to the two Caponiers. You can actually see those. And what was interesting about the Caponiers were these high-peaked roofs. Still haven't figured out what the purpose was for that architectural feature. Okay? Next slide. So the Caponiers, as you can see in the image, these Caponiers, 3 sets of them, and in between would be where the drawbridge would be. In about 1833, there was a massive storm that actually caused a lot of erosion on the sea face of the fort, which is on the image to the left, upper right. And it actually breached the moat. And so they had to build up, and they actually had to rebuild some of and reinforce the Caponiers. And they had to do that several times throughout the existence of the fort prior to the war. Okay? Next. Okay. So a picture says 1,000 words. These pictures that I'm getting ready to show you, most of these have not been seen before. I stumbled on these a couple of years ago. And they were taken about 1895, just prior to Fort Caswell being greatly altered by the Army. 1898 is when a lot of destruction occurs inside the fort. But with this image here, this is looking at the main Sallyport. You can see one of the Caponiers on the left, and you can see the loopholes, these holes in the walls. That's where the riflemen can shoot through. So you can see in between is going to be the base or the bed for the drawbridge that was there. The caponniers, and you can see in the back, you can see the top of the wall of the fort. Again, outside, those structures are still there. They're just covered up. And if you want to know exactly where they are, when you go out to the parking lot, look to your right, you'll see a couple of mounds coming off the walls. That's those caponniers. Okay, next one. The ditch looking from the caponnier actually this is looking from the point where basically where the convention center is, looking down the ditch to where the Sallyport is, where you come in from the road. You can see some of the features. You can see basically this wet ditch was the moat, and then the dry ditch right up on top of it. To the right in the photograph is actually the Civil War fortifications that were put up. As I'll explain in a little bit, Fort Caswell is going to be abandoned, or Fort Caswell proper will be abandoned during the war. Next slide. Another image. This image has actually this one's been published before. This one is, again, that same Sally, actually, my circle's in the wrong place. It's actually the opposite Sallyport. That Sallyport, that caponnier is still in existence. It's another one that's been covered up by sand over the years. Okay? And then this looking again at that same caponnier set in Sallyport, and again, you can see this is another one that hasn't been seen before. What's interesting is, if you look at this caponnier that's right on the left side, you can see that high peaked roof, but that's a facade. Again, I'll show you in the other photo, in the other images, what they did to these roofs. Okay, next. The Citadel. The Citadel was another interesting feature because it took up the bulk of the parade ground. And this Citadel feature, again, is something unique to Fort Caswell. I've not found another third system fort that had this feature in it. It was shaped, if you looked at it from above, it kind of looked like a crucifix, a crude crucifix. But it was basically where the last defense would take place if the fort was overrun. And it truly would have been a very, very tough nut to crack. And the other feature you can see in the bottom image, you can see basically this is an 1830, the bottom one is 1834, where you can see where they're getting the walls put in. And you can see just how much of only the roof of the fort is going to be seen, or the roof of the Citadel is going to be seen above the walls. Okay, next. And another image of the Citadel. This is looking from the I guess you would call them the 12-inch gun emplacements that have been put in. This is looking from the walls down, but you can see how extensive this feature was. And it was a large crucifix-shaped building. Okay? So the way this building was laid out, as a citadel, you see the center X, that X-shaped structure. To get into that building, there were 4 doors, and they were at the ends of each X, and they were iron doors. They would open outward. So when they're pulled shut, they can be barred, and it's going to be very difficult to beat those doors and get them open. You also have loopholes all the way around it for the troops inside to fire out of. Now, the two long wings, those would be for the enlisted and possibly the NCOs. Those would be their dormitories. The whole thing's divided into basically eight rooms. 4 sections, 8 rooms, all of them separate. They all have fireplaces for cooking. They all have water access. Once you get into one section, if a force gets into the X, you've got 21 muskets firing at you from different sides to enfilade the fire to crossfire. So getting in there is going to be murder. The other feature that's interesting about this is the cisterns are located underneath the X. So there's actually 4 cisterns. You're going to have scuppers and lead piping coming from the barbette tier around the fort, also scuppers on the roof of the citadel that's going to collect this water, and it's all going to be piped in to these cisterns. So it's all self-contained. Fort Caswell would not get an outside water source until 1917, when fresh water was pumped in from Southport. Okay. Another image that hasn't been seen before. This one's showing basically the center of that X. This is where everything comes together inside the citadel. Archaeologists were able to excavate the fort and excavate the citadel in 2011 and 2013. And we were able to actually get and actually see where that pilaster was sitting, where the X, everything comes together. One of the interesting finds was an Austrian Lorenz musket, which was a Confederate musket used by the garrison. Apparently, when the Confederates evacuated the fort, somebody left that gun leaning up against the wall. When the building was burned, the floors burned, and that gun just slid right down the wall and rested in the muck. And we were able to find it 150 years later. Hopefully that's going to be coming back here soon. It is in very, very, very fragile shape, and it's taken several years to undergo conservation. Okay? Now, what y'all came for? Civil War. So, January 8th, 1861, Fort Caswell was taken by North Carolina militia. On January 11th, it was given back. Why? Because North Carolina had not seceded from the Union, and it was deemed by the governor of North Carolina an illegal seizure. So the fort was given back. And basically what they did was North Carolina militia from Wilmington and Smithville, now Southport, took Fort Johnston over in Smithville, then came across the harbor, knocked on the door of the fort. Sergeant Frederick Dartingkiller, the one soldier here at the fort, answered the door. They demanded the keys. He said he can't give them the keys. They said they're outnumber them. He says, I'll give you the keys if you give me a receipt. Typical Army. Typical Army. So they give him a receipt. He gives them the keys. All said and done. While he's waiting for to get word to Washington to give his report, that's when Governor Ellis says, no. Y'all jumped the gun a little bit. You can't do this. Give the fort back. And so they give the forts back. Time goes on, the firing on Fort Sumter, and on April 16th, guess what? North Carolina militia come back, do the same thing. Knock on the door, opens the door. We're here for the fort. He says, give me a receipt, I'll give you the keys. He got the receipt, gave him the keys. This time Dartingkiller left because he knew it wasn't going to be, it wasn't going to be given back. So he leaves. He heads out. the Ordnance Sergeant James Riley, who was in command of Fort Johnston, he sent the keys to Washington, or he sent the receipt to Washington along with his letter of resignation. Riley would become very well known during the war, very well known artillerist. Unfortunately, he's best known for being the only person to surrender several forts. He surrendered Fort Johnston twice and ended up, debatable, surrendering Fort Fisher. Now, where Fort Caswell really starts getting its changes, the changes occur starting in April of 1862. April 62 is a big month for fortifications. April 11th, Fort Pulaski, a sister of Fort Caswell outside of Savannah, will be taken. Now, one thing about third system forts is they're designed to withstand about a 3-week bombardment by traditional smoothbore artillery, which is the artillery of choice when all these forts were designed and built. The Federals cheated. I can say that, I'm Southern. They cheated. They didn't use smoothbore, they used rifles. So what should have taken 3 weeks to reduce, the Federal Army did it in 30 hours. They were able to pick one spot on the wall of Fort Pulaski and breach it with rifled artillery. Then, because they did it there, they did the same thing at Fort Macon on April 26th. Only took them about 11 hours to make Fort Macon surrender. So overnight, Fort Caswell goes from the strongest fortification, most important fortification in the Cape Fear, to the most vulnerable. Confederates realized they've got to do something. One of the tactics that the Federals used at Fort Pulaski was to use the natural terrain. Well, you're on an island. You're on the beach. What the heck could they use to get close? Sand dunes. The Federals were able to move their artillery into position, basically using the natural sand dunes as fortifications. So what did the Confederates do here? They level all the dunes from here all the way out to the golf course. Granted, it wasn't a golf course back then, but I figured that's a reference point y'all know. So yes, they level all the dunes between here and the golf course so the Federals can't move artillery into position. Then they start building outworks. They build Battery Shaw, which sits approximately in the vicinity of where the guard gate is now to get in here. Then they build Battery Campbell, which is about where the Coast Guard station and the lighthouse is. Those are the outworks. Now for Fort Caswell, they come up with a new design. At first, they had planned to put casemated, put railroad iron casemates on top of the fort. Basically what they were going to do is take wood and railroad iron and build a shield, cut an embrasure in it to allow a gun to shoot through it. Well, it's a good idea, and they actually got a bunch of those built with wood. They couldn't get enough railroad iron and couldn't justify the use of the railroad iron because there's so much railroad iron being needed to build ironclads, ships here. So that plan is pretty much abandoned. They get several of them put in, but it's eventually abandoned, and they eventually build a counter fort, a fort outside of Fort Caswell. So in this picture up here, the red that you see at the top, those are works that are proposed. What's in the black, that's what's been reworked. That doesn't make any sense right now. But the next few will make some sense to it. Okay, next. Going back to the Caponeers, for whatever reason, the district commander, William Henry Chase Whiting, hated these high-peaked roofs for the Caponeers. So he had those removed, and he put these kind of low arched caponniers in, or rooftops. And actually, that was supposed to be in an earlier slide. It just got moved. Sorry. Next. Okay. So, in the top image, you see the citadel in the center. You see what I'm talking about, these casemated emplacements on top of the barbette tier, where literally they're building a shield with sides on it to fire the cannons through it. Now, the thing was, Fort Caswell had a wide variety of guns, so you've got to build different size shields. It's not as simple as building one size fits all. They had to change, and they had to build different sizes. And so that doesn't work. And you can see what they plan on the outsides. You can see where on the right of the top where they've got that cannon sitting. That was an original. But what they end up doing is literally going outside the moat and building up basically a whole new earthen fortification. They basically build Fort Fisher around Fort Caswell. That's the only way I can describe it to y'all. You understand Fort Fisher. Think of Fort Fisher encircling Fort Caswell, and that's pretty much what they did. The middle image shows how they were able to get up onto the fortifications. They also tunneled in from the ditch to build galleries, magazines, bomb proofs, storage areas, just a little bit of everything. So they had a whole complex in the ground. The bottom image is approximately where we are right now. That deep hole to the left of the ditch is right out here in the parking lot. It's been filled in. If y'all come out here on Thursday after we supposedly have 99% chance of rain tomorrow, you'll see what I'm talking about. And if you've ever been out here after a good rain, you'll see that hole. Okay. So this is Fort Caswell by 1865. And you can see it's a sprawling complex. You still have the original fort, the citadel, and the original parade ground and third system fort right there in the middle. You still have the caponniers, you still have the ditches, but outside it is a whole complex. Now, in January 15th, 1865, Fort Fisher falls. At that point, New Inlet is closed. The Cape Fear River's, for the most part, useless. What are you going to do with the fortifications south of Fort Fisher? Well, if you're Braxton Bragg, you're going to just say, oh, well, everybody out. And that's what he did. Bragg, after Fort Fisher falls, orders all the fortifications south of Fort Fisher to be abandoned. The garrisons moved upriver to Fort Anderson. Now, Fort Caswell served as the headquarters for the defenses of the mouth of the Cape Fear. The defenses of the mouth of the Cape Fear were from Caswell all the way up to Fort Anderson. Included Battery Shaw, Battery Campbell, which were outworks of Caswell, Battery Holmes or Fort Holmes over on Bald Head, Fort Johnston, Branch, Pender, went by all three names, in Smithville, Fort Fisher, all the outworks of Fort Fisher plus Fort Anderson. And Fort Caswell served not only as the headquarters, but as the reserve magazine for all these fortifications. So there's huge amounts of black powder being stored here. In fact, in the upper right, if you look at the far right caponnier, just to the left of it, you see where there's kind of a blanked out area? All right, that was part of the wall of the fort. That section of the fort held about 100,000 pounds of black powder. You'll see in the bottom left, that hole. Yeah, that's the hole I was talking about earlier. That one held roughly 20 to 25,000 pounds. The ensuing explosion, yes, Bragg ordered not only the fort to be abandoned, but blown up. The explosion was felt and heard 100 miles away in Fayetteville, and it vaporized that section of the wall. It just disappeared. And it created a crater where the parking lot is here. Now, when y'all go out, you probably won't see it tonight, but when you go out and you look at that wall right there by the parking lot, you'll see it's all pockmarked and chewed up and broken and cracked. That's the shock from that explosion. That's the shock from the explosion. And that's pretty much going to end Fort Caswell as an effective fortification. After the war, for the most part, it's abandoned. It'll have caretaker status. It'll still be armed. The Army will bring in some modern ordnance, 15-inch Dahlgrens, some bigger guns. But aside from that, it's just going to sit. And it's not going to be until 1896 that the Army is going to take interest in the fort again. And by 1898, they are beginning to tear down a lot of the features. All the outside works are going to be leveled. And a good portion of the sea face is going to be covered in concrete and have modern artillery put in. Next. So you can see this is the overlay of the 1865 works on top of what we've got now. And then you can see this next one is the previous along with the new one. So there's still an extensive amount of fortification left in the ground. The archaeology that we did, we actually were able to find the wet and dry ditches on the gorge side. Now, when I say gorge side, that's that long, straight side that's right out here in the parking lot. We were actually able to excavate and find the ditch. The ditch, the moat, is brick-lined. Both walls and the floors are bricked. I was actually able to get inside one of the caponniers. It's scary. I can tell you it's scary. It's full of sand. So literally I'm going all the way to the scarp wall and crawling on sand, and I'm, in some places brushing up against the ceiling. But the amazing thing is the whole interior of that caponnier scorched. So they burned, literally the Confederates burned everything they could when they left. So they set the citadel on fire, blew up those magazines, basically tried to make Caswell useless. And for the most part, they did. But there's still a lot more to look for. It'd be interesting to go out onto the ocean face to see still what's out there. If y'all go to Fort Fisher, you'll see two new 32-pounder, rifled 32-pound guns at Fort Fisher that were brought over from Raleigh. Those were found in the moat at Fort Caswell. And there's probably still guns buried out here somewhere. It would not surprise me in the least. But Fort Caswell is a fascinating place. I highly encourage y'all, and I promise a tour is a lot more exciting than watching it on these slides, because I can actually show you, physically point, and you can physically touch some of the stuff I'm talking about. We just found, well, I say we just, a few years ago, found one of the lead scuppers where you collect the water for for the cisterns. It's just amazing stuff. Like I said, this is an architect's dream, an engineer's dream. So if you got any engineers out here, you'll enjoy it. You'll enjoy the tour. Next slide. That should be it. I tried to keep it quick. Probably not my best talk. It helps if I have a clicker. I forgot. That's my fault. I forgot the clicker. But if there's any questions.
For a few questions, anybody? Jim, let me start. What was the population of the fort during the Civil War? How many people were here?
Population? That depended. Generally speaking, you'd have 2 to 3 companies of heavy artillery. Company of artillery, depending, would be anywhere from 80 to 110 men. Plus you'd have medical engineers. You would have some quote-unquote Coast Guards, which were nothing more than basically local militia that would patrol the beaches. So you could have anywhere from 250 to 350 men at any given time.
That was fascinating. Thank you very much for that. I was wondering, prior to the Civil War, on what occasions was this fort needed? It was protecting the Cape Fear River, I imagine. And also, if you could, what was the range of the guns in the fort? Was it just, again, to protect the mouth of the river, or could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. The purpose of the fort was primarily to defend the mouth of the river, keep Wilmington safe. Now, that being said, you had New Inlet, just 4 miles away. Now, granted, New Inlet, a major warship's not going to get into New Inlet, so really the Army wasn't too concerned about New Inlet. But Fort Caswell's primary purpose, yes, was to guard the mouth of the Cape Fear, keep Wilmington protected, and the only real occasions that it was manned during the the Mexican War, basically you had some artillery units brought in for training. Because you still had a little bit of action around Veracruz, Mexico, and that sort of thing. So there was a need for coast artillery and heavy artillery. But it was never really fully garrisoned until the Civil War. It was, for the most part, almost always in caretaker status, even though it would have, I think, at its peak, 54 guns. Now, as far as the range of the guns, it all depends on the gun. The smallest seacoast gun that Fort Caswell had was 24-pounders. And you're looking at a range of about 1,800 to 2,000 yards. And the biggest would be 10-inch Columbiads, which range about 2 miles. Then you also had, later on, most of y'all are familiar with Fort Fisher, am I correct? And a number of you are familiar with the Armstrong, the 150-pound Armstrong that was at Fort Fisher. What most people don't realize is Fort Caswell had its sister. And the Navy took control of Caswell's Armstrong, took it to the Washington Navy Yard, and it was scrapped during World War II. But it was a rifled gun, and it had a range of about 3 to 3.5 miles. So 3 to 3.5 miles is the max that the average guns at Fort Caswell could fire. At one point, or at various points, there would have been a 12-pound Whitworth, which was a small rifled gun, but it would be the equivalent of what we would consider now the German 88. I mean, it was an incredible gun. Had a range roughly 10,000 yards. Now, the problem with any of these guns, if I say it has a range of 3.5 miles or 10,000 yards. That's fantastic. But if you can't see the target, you can't hit the target. All of these guns are direct fire guns, so you've got to literally be able to see the target to hit it. As far as I know, the Union Navy never got close enough to fire a shot at Fort Caswell. So it did its job. So yeah, Fort Caswell starts out as the most powerful fort in the Cape Fear, then goes to the weak link, and then goes right back to the strongest. And we can debate Fort Fisher versus Fort Caswell, which would actually be a good little talk. Have a debate. Two historians up here debating pros and cons of Fort Fisher, Fort Caswell, see who wins. I say Fort Caswell was stronger than Fort Fisher. Fort Fisher didn't have a back door. Caswell did. But, so that's a whole nother debate. But yeah, about 3.5 miles for the guns mounted in the fort, maximum range. Minimum range, about 1,800, 2,000 yards.
Time for one or two more questions? Anywhere going once? Don't forget, we've got these beautiful prints up here for sale, and somebody gets their choice of one of those 3 that had the lucky draw ticket. Any other questions? We've got one more right there for the last question of the night.
Because it actually, at that point, served no purpose. Because New Inlet, which is above, had been taken. So, and the Federals were bringing ships into New Inlet. So blockade runners, and they had Fort Fisher. Fort Fisher's guns, the difference between Fort Fisher and Fort Caswell, the way the guns are mounted, they're both barbette. Now, when I say mounted in barbette, everybody think of the battleship North Carolina. The main guns are mounted in barbette. They're on the deck. So with here, they're on top of the fort. They're mounted on top of the fort. The difference is Fort Caswell's guns are front pintle, which means they only traverse 180 degrees. Some of Fort Fisher's guns were on center pintle, which means they could traverse 360 degrees. And so the Federals, after they captured Fort Fisher, could turn the guns and face the river and easily hit the river. They also controlled New Inlet, so blockade runners couldn't come into New Inlet anymore. If they came into Old Inlet, around Caswell, the blockade runners still can't go up to Wilmington because the Federals control everything above. So really, I can gripe about Braxton Bragg all I want to for abandoning the fort. It would serve no purpose to keep the fort. The Federals would have just bypassed it. They would have just bypassed it. Now, the big question is, why didn't the Federals try to attack Caswell when they did? I mean, when they could. They never tried. It was always threats, but they never tried.
Jim, thanks very much, and don't forget he's got some books up here for sale, and I'll autograph them, I'm sure. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.